The strange-looking, weather-beaten man, sitting in the shadows near the wall, was also listening intently. He had a tall tankard in front of him, and was smoking a long-stemmed pipe carved with unfamiliar markings. A travel-stained cloak of heavy dark green cloth was drawn close about him, but the gleam of his eyes could be seen beneath the ragged hood. For all the perils and foul fiends the man had seen, an unseen crown lay upon his head, and his greatest trials were yet to come. This video was brought to you as a suggestion from one of my amazing patrons over on Patreon. If you like this, or say my educational on-writing content, and you want secret insights into the on-writing book that is coming soon-ish, come join the Discord for a couple of bucks a month and support the channel. Link down below. Aragorn was born in 2931 of the Third Age to Arathorn and Gilraen in a time of turmoil for the ranges of the north. The fell winter had swept the land not long before, bringing white wolves down from the mountains, and the necromancer was growing in strength in Mirkwood, a web of corruption reaching from Dol Guldur. Gilraen's mother, Iverwyn, prophesied that their boy would unite the peoples of the West. He shall have a kingly valour, but I see on his breast a green stone, and from that his true name shall come, for he shall be a healer and a renewer. For this they named him Aragorn, a name Tolkien said draws from languages so old that they are not readily interpretable, but it may draw from the Sindarin words for revered king or royal seed. Iverwyn could not have known of the green stone that she prophesied about. It was an ancient elf stone, forged in Valinor by Irneradil, with Yavanna's help, Valor of the Earth. The Alisar, which you may know is Aragorn's royal name. It was a foreshadowing of his anointed rule to come. The Alisar was described in that the light of the sun should be imprisoned inside of it. Those who looked through the stone saw things that were withered or burned healed, and that the hands of the one who held it brought to all they touched healing from hurt. This too connects to Aragorn's destiny as a healer, not just a leader, which we would come to see in The Return of the King, during the chapter of the Houses of Healing. The first season of the oncoming Amazon Lord of the Rings TV series will reportedly focus on a young Aragorn. From Gondor to Rohan to Mordor to espionage and prophecy, there's a lot to cover. But Aragorn was only 2 years old when his father, Arathorn, went riding against orcs of the north alongside the sons of Elrond, Elladan and Elrohir, where an orc arrow pierced his eye and killed him. Sauron had been searching for the ears of Isildur, and had previously killed Aragorn's grandfather in 2930. Fearing the same thing would happen to Aragorn, Gilraen whisked him to a safe haven, Imladris, or Rivendell. Elrond and Gilraen agreed to keep who he truly was from him, instead naming him Estel, which means hope in Quenya. Aragorn grew up amongst the elves, and like his father, he too travelled with Elladan and Elrohir about the north, to hunt the growing threat of Sauron. It is possible that he travelled with them because they would have been one of the only people who knew of his heritage. They would know to keep him safe, that he had a greater destiny before him. In his ventures, Elrond saw him grow as a man, in strength and wisdom. And at 20 years of age in 2952, Elrond and Gilraen revealed who he truly was to him. In recognition of his heritage, Elrond first gave him the Ring of Barahir, forged in Valinor and passed down the line of Númenórean kings. Aragorn also inherited the Shards of Narsil, the blade that brought Sauron low once before, a blade the Dark Lord would fear.
Behold the sword of Elendil.
However, he did not give him the Scepter of Annúminas, a symbol of the ruling office of men. Elrond told him that he had yet to earn it. And this idea of earning the right to rule, to become the ideal king, the Platonic idea of what a king should be, is a theme that runs through Aragorn's story, and plays into his character arc as at times he feels he does not live up to it. Knowing who he was for the first time in his life, Aragorn would begin to struggle coming to terms with his responsibility and his fate. Though others would be suspicious of him, even fear him as one of the Rangers, they would not know him as their king. The next day at sunset, Aragorn wandered into the woods alone, singing. He thought he must have been seeing some mirage or magical vision, because he saw Luthien, a long-dead elf from the tales of old, the most beautiful of all of the children of Ilúvatar. Her mantle was sown with golden flowers, but her hair was as dark as the shadows of twilight. When the girl stepped out of the light, though, she revealed her name to be Arwen. We see here that he was brought up with the tales of the Silmarillion. He was learned in elvish lore, and we see throughout The Lord of the Rings that Aragorn sees things through a lens of history. He compares people and events to stories from the past. This is, in a sense, one traditional trait of a Platonic king, knowing history, seeing its value and learning from it. Elrond confronts Aragorn for his affection, telling him of the doomed years that lie before him, where the fate of all would rest on his shoulders, bidding that Arwen was too high above him to be his. Aragorn protests, and it is here that Aragorn learns of the dire choice that elves face, that to stay with him would be to take a mortal life, to shoulder a cloak of the doom of men. But there will be no choice before Arwen, my beloved, unless you, Aragorn, Arathorn's son, come between us and bring one of us, you or me, to a bitter parting beyond the end of the world. Once again, Aragorn feels the weight of duty, that he must prove himself. Gilraen and Elrond bid Aragorn that he must be a king amongst all men, not just the rough rangers of the north, but of the high courts of the southern Gondorians, and allies of the stout horsemen of the Rohirrim. Accepting this, if nervously, Aragorn sets out to serve across Middle-earth for nearly 30 years. In 2956, 5 years into his venture, Aragorn met a wizard in northern Eriador, whom he came to know as Gandalf. This was when he acquired his first pseudonym as Strider, the dark and mysterious ranger who patrolled these northern lands. At first he travelled in groups, often with other rangers of his tribe, but as the years went on, Aragorn found himself isolated and grim, preferring to travel alone after the perils he had seen and experienced across Middle-earth. Orcs, trolls, and older and fouler things in the deep places of the world. Aragorn first rode under the banners of King Thingol of Rohan, which may be why Aragorn knows an old Rohirric poem in the Two Towers. Part of it is spoken by Theoden in the films.
Where is the horse and the rider? Where is the horn that was blowing? They have passed like rain on the mountains, like wind in the meadow. The days have gone down in the west, behind the hills, into shadow.
Aragorn learned not just their ways of war, but of their history, of their court, of their language. Rohan at the time was facing its first challenges from Saruman in 2960 of the Third Age. Rohan was at its strongest when Aragorn served amongst them, so we can understand his sorrow in seeing what it has become, a ghost of its former self in the Two Towers. Sometime after 2960 of the Third Age, Aragorn joined the forces of Ecthelion II. Ecthelion encouraged all men of worth near and far to enter his service, and to those who proved trustworthy he gave rank and reward. And he gained a Gondorian name, Thorongil, people called him. It meant Eagle of the Star, for he was swift and keen-eyed, and wore a silver star upon his cloak. But no one knew his true name. He was a great leader of men by land or by sea, but he departed into the shadows whence he came, before the days of Ecthelion were ended. Little is known of Aragorn's quests with Gondor, but he achieved fame and glory in 2980 in the surprise attack on Umbar. Rebels with an age-old blood feud with Gondor had become a seafaring power to the south. Knowing that Sauron was nearing open war, Thorongil advised that the Corsairs would prove deadly. They would become able to block their ports and southern fiefs, starving Gondor out, as well as enabling Mordor to ship troops quickly to encircle the capital. However, Ecthelion knew that the Gondorian navy could not face Umbar in the open ocean, and so he only allowed Thorongil to take a small fleet for an ambush. Under the cover of night, the small fleet blockaded a port where the Umbar host was anchored, possibly in the Bay of Belfalas along the southern coast. Assailing the fleet, they burned as many ships as they could, while Thorongil himself faced down against the Umbar captain on the quays, the Gondorian fleet withdrawing by the time the Umbar had mustered their forces. This assault crippled the Umbar numbers, and though he was destined to return home to a great honour at Minas Tirith, Aragorn said his farewells and left at the port of Pelargir. And interestingly, this is something that we see a lot in Aragorn's story throughout The Lord of the Rings. He regularly refuses the honour of kingship or leadership when it could be given to him. For example, after the Battle of Pelennor Fields, he refuses to enter Minas Tirith until Sauron is vanquished. This may be another example of that. He doesn't feel he deserves that right yet, to be treated as the victor, to be honoured as such, when so much else is wrong with him and the world. In the year 2980, Aragorn passed out of the knowledge of men of the West, and went alone far into the east and deep into the south, exploring the hearts of men, both evil and good, and uncovering the plots and devices of the servants of Sauron. I find this line interesting because it says that Aragorn met both good and evil men in the south, when for the most part all men from these regions are portrayed as corrupted in the lore. They are the Haradrim that they faced down against in the Battle of Pelennor Fields. Though through all of this, Aragorn became learned in the ways of both elves and men, both the righteous and the fallen. He knew of their poetry, of their war strategies, counselling two different monarchs. It is said that despite all of this, he was sad and stern because of the doom that was laid upon him. But he remained hopeful. It was when he was 49 that Aragorn returned from the perils of the dark confines of Mordor, knowing thine enemy, to Lothlorien, where once again he found Arwen. There, on the summer solstice, he longed for her sexy elf ears, and she longed for his Númenórean blade. It is here that we get this moment. It actually takes place before The Lord of the Rings, where she says, "I will cleave to you, Dunedain, and turn from the twilight, yet there lies the land of my people and the long home of all of my kin." As a promise of marriage in return, he gives her the ring of Barahir that Elrond had given him. Elrond was heartbroken at the thought of losing his daughter when he learned this, but after a time, he concedes in saying that maybe Arwen joining with Aragorn will restore the world to an age of men and an age of peace. However, he demands that Aragorn be both the king of Gondor and Arnor, two historically Númenórean kingdoms of old. A task that may have seemed insurmountable, but a large theme in Tolkien's work is the past repeating itself, that history is a cycle. And King Thingol demanded once before that Beren obtain a Silmaril in order to wed Luthien. I'm just happy that I won't have to defeat a Dark Lord to marry my girlfriend. I hope? Just as he would reunite the historic kingdoms of men, as he would reignite the line of Isildur, this is him having to live up to the legendary figures of the past. Aragorn's life took a dark turn though, when Sauron revealed himself to the world, and Gandalf came to suspect that the ring that Bilbo had acquired in his journey to Erebor was the fated One Ring of the Dark Lord. Aragorn and Gandalf would search for Gollum in the Vales of Anduin, Mirkwood, Rivanion, and even venture to Mordor in secrecy. But fate was not in their favour, and Gollum, the one person who could tell them the past of that ring, was captured by the enemy. It was likely to be around the year 3007, because this was when Aragorn returned to his people in Eriador, hearing of his mother's ill health. "This is our last parting, Estelle, my son. I am aged by care, even as one of lesser men, and now that it draws near, I cannot face the darkness of our time that gathers upon Middle-earth. I shall leave it soon," she told him. And she died next spring. In the year 3017, Gollum was released from Mordor, but before he could escape far, Aragorn resumed his hunt and caught up with him in the Dead Marshes. Aragorn drove Gollum through the north end of the Emyn Muil, and crossed Anduin just above Samgabir, through the skirts of Fangorn, where he crossed the Anduin again, with the help of the Beornings. Aragorn accomplished this with wariness in 50 days, reaching Thranduil of Mirkwood. At the same time, Sauron learned that his enemies had captured Gollum, the one person who held this crucial secret. He sent his forces, and they pursued Aragorn to Mirkwood. They raided the area, aiming to capture or kill Gollum, or at least to deprive his enemies of him. Amidst the battles in Thranduil's kingdom, the forest was torn asunder, but Gandalf and Aragorn interrogated Gollum. We pressed him and he whined and cringed, and rubbed his long hands, licking his fingers as if they pained him, as if he remembered some old torture. Through him, the enemy had learned that the One had been found again. He knows where Isildur fell, he knows where Gollum found his ring, he knows that it is a great ring. And though they learned this, that the one ring that the Dark Lord had poured his power and malice and soul into was hidden in the Shire, during one of his deadly raids, Gollum escaped once more into the shadows and away from Aragorn. Riding with the wind and all haste, Aragorn went flight-footed to the Shire, where he learned of Frodo's plan to take the One Ring south. Assuming his old identity as Strider, Aragorn's story arrives at an old and familiar tale.
He's one of them rangers. Round here, he's known as Strider.
Once again, thank you to Tantrum on Patreon for suggesting this topic. It was a nice, lighter one to do. Our Discord community is an incredible group of writers and Tolkien nerds and Avatar geeks. If that sounds like you, throw in a couple of bucks on the Patreon, and I would love to see you there. There is a link down below. Boy, it's hot. And that is the reason I didn't do this video, mostly with camera, because I'm gonna look really awful and sweaty. And it is much easier to just sit there without my shirt on and record my voice and pour water over myself because it's way too hot at the moment. Why did I do that? Stay nerdy, and I will see you in the future.